Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to M4L Academy. I'm Missy Karwowski, Director of M4LA, and I'm so glad you've joined us, as always. This is our campus briefing series in our brand new month of focusing on MAHA at schools, which of course means we'll be looking at school lunch, school vaccination requirements, and some healthier options for you to consider. Remember, this is not medical advice. We're not trying to diagnose anything, but this is just good information for you to consider to be able to make better, healthier choices in your life. So the campus briefing is when we bring in our experts to help demystify those complex topics, issues, politics, and policies that impact kids, schools, and of course, your rights as a parent. I have to say, this is probably the topic I am most excited easily to talk about because I love food. Our speaker today is going to be talking to us about food, nutrition, and just unpacking so many of the lies that we've been fed over the years. My history, my kids know well that I can make an analogy out of food or exercise for pretty much anything because those are kind of like have always been really big focuses in my life, for better or worse. And I, in researching for this month, went on a bit of a journey, I will say, and it has been a delightful time. And I can personally say this is the first time in my life that I've looked at food as fuel, as something that is not an enemy. That's been a real experience for me. And the speaker we have today is going to dive into that and help make healthy food really approachable and interesting, and again, unpack some of those lies that we've been told. Today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about health. She lives it, teaches it, and makes it feel possible for the rest of us to be healthy, that is. Tracey Stroup is a naturopathic doctor, fitness professional, master herbalist, and founder of the Abiding Wellness Academy. But more than her impressive credentials, Tracey brings a rare blend of deep expertise and down-to-earth compassion that makes even the most intimidating health topics feel just like a conversation with a wise friend who also happens to be hilarious. Her journey started with a degree in exercise and sports science from Penn State and evolved through decades of personal experience, motherhood, and a relentless pursuit of truth in wellness. Whether she's breaking down the myth of calorie counting, exposing the dangers of glyphosate, or reminding us that real food doesn't come in a box with a cartoon character. Tracey's mission is clear: empower families to take back their health, one bite at a time. She's the founder of a telehealth service, a speaker on medical freedom, and the Chief Health and Growth Officer at GetHealthy.store. But she's also the mom who lets her kids cook with her, the woman who laughs at her own tech struggles, and the voice reminding us that health isn't about perfection. It's about progress, purpose, and planting seeds. Literally and figuratively. The best way to find more from Tracey is at her website, TraceyStroupND.com. She has a podcast, books, courses you can take, and even a wellness store, so make sure to check that out. So get ready for a conversation that's equal parts inspiring, informative, and just the right amount of spicy. Let's get started. Welcome back to class. Before we really dive in, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited about today and what you're doing here to inform parents and everybody else that's listening. I've been in the health and wellness industry about 27 years. So I started out in personal training. I have a degree in exercise science. I was a personal trainer for years. Much like you, I worked out all the time and restricted myself because, that's what we did in the 90s, not knowing any better. And then I got married and had kids. And my first son ended up being a C-section. Although I wanted to have him natural at home, he ended up being a breech and a footling, and it was like a hot mess, and they made me go to the hospital. So after that, he developed a little bit of skin issues. And although I had always been pretty natural, I grew up typical 80s, 90s kid with the fast food and the super size me and the Diet Coke and the microwave and all the things. So I had always struggled with weight. And then when I became a personal trainer, that kind of nixed it as long as I was really working out all the time and restricting myself. And then when I had my first son, he had a little bit of skin issues due to the C-section, and I started to look around as to what else could I do, because it looked like it was an inside issue expressing itself outside. So I went back to school. I became a naturopathic doctor. And from there, I've just been, growing in the industry. But most important, I'm a mom and a wife of two beautiful boys. And, so that's the most important job I have.
Absolutely. I agree with that. Well, I am very thankful that you came on here because this is a topic that obviously is really hot right now. With thankfully, we're really getting attention to it in a good way, I think, for possibly the first time in a very long time. We were talking before we started about how there's been fads over the years. And I think that, you look back in time and we can always say we can easily pinpoint fad diets, various ones over the past, gosh, however many decades, probably even centuries if we really went further back.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those things that there's within those fads, there's all sorts of myths. And let's dive right into talking about some of the basics, including some of the myths, such as a calorie is a calorie. This is one that I've heard for a long time. Can you help explain, is that true? And why would our body be processing certain calories differently?
Well, here's the thing. I don't count calories, I count chemicals. So that's like my saying. I tell everybody and all of my clients, stop counting calories. You want to count chemicals. Calories are a unit of heat. It would be like saying, hey, this bagel has 23 Fahrenheits in it. It's kind of silly. And so our body does utilize heat to increase thermogenic temperature as a form of energy to fuel metabolic processes. When you are utilizing foods that are primarily chemicals, your body gets confused. It doesn't know what to do with that. So taking in, for example, a soda and an apple might have the same amount of calories, but they're definitely not the same. One is a chemical cocktail that confuses the body, the soda, and the other is a life-giving food that fuels, repairs, and grows. It has fiber, it has nutrients, it has all the things that your body recognizes. So, when it comes to calories, they're not the same. You are either eating food or junk. There's no such thing as junk food. So that term, again, people always say, oh, it's junk food. No such thing as junk food. It's either junk or food. That's what my friend Jamie always says. So ultra processed foods make up about 60% of our kids' daily calories now. And that was according to JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, in 2021. So that's a huge amount of calories that come from chemical-laden processed foods that basically confuses the body and does nothing to contribute to your health.
So why does this confuse the body? Why do we have, what's happening? What is your body doing that's processing these calories? How does your body process it differently?
Yeah. So real food, right, will contain things like enzymes, probiotics, living nutrients, living compounds. I always tell people, if something can reproduce life on its own, it can reproduce life in you. If you're eating something that's a chemical product that has, preservatives, additives, pesticides, things that are going to be essentially poison to your body's going to spend more time trying to downregulate systems to protect you, such as assimilation and absorption. It's going to downregulate pathways within cells so that chemical or poison doesn't get into your cells. The body's very smart. So it's going to spend more energy on deflecting and protecting to a point where it can't than it is going to be trying to find nutrients within that chemical, what I say, poop storm, rather than making you healthier. So if you think about it like this, let's say your house is on fire and the fireman is trying to find your cat and it's filled with smoke and all kinds of things. The fireman's going to have a harder time if there's a bunch of smoke and everything else in the way, versus if the house catches on fire and the fireman can get in there and there's nothing in the way. So with real food, your enzymes, your probiotics, these are life-giving nutrients that the body knows and understands because there's enzymes and probiotics within you There isn't polysorbate 80 inside of you. There isn't sucralose inside of you. So your body doesn't know what that is. It doesn't recognize those compounds. And so if it doesn't recognize or have the ability to assimilate them in a pathway, then it's poison. And so your body's going to go into a defense mechanism.
So just so I want to restate something because I can still feel that brainwashing of low fat food and burning calories, burning fat, like coming back in the back of my head as you're saying that. So your body uses more energy. It's harder to go get the nutrients, which is what is that it actually needs. That's not a good thing. We're not saying that it's good that your body is burning more of this, because I think there's other thoughts there of
Yeah.
I've always heard of, like free food, like strawberries, like your body burns more energy than it takes to digest it, than there are calories in there or
You go
whatever.
back to the calorie
So
thing. I'd like to erase the calories from all verbiage. And if there's fitness professionals out there still counting calories, 1986 called and they want your degree back. So calories do not matter. It's nutrients. Your body builds on nutrition. First are macronutrients. These are protein, carbs, and fat. Okay. Those come from sources like animals, plants, trees, vegetables, fruits, good fats like coconut. Those are macronutrients. And then you have micronutrients, which are all the vitamins and minerals inside. Your body can recognize synthetic versus organic. And organic doesn't mean no pesticides, it just means living. So anything that's living is going to connect with your body that's living. So calories, what happens when you run, right? You start to sweat. And so you're increasing thermogenic temperature. It's not to burn calories. Your thermogenic temperature increases when you run because it's enhancing metabolic processes so that you can create enough glucose from the liver in order to sustain the run, so that you can sweat and detoxify things from the skin that are interfering with pathways within your body. Your thermogenic temperature isn't increasing so you can burn calories. It has nothing to do with it, because I think you can probably attest to this with people that you know. You probably know people that exercise 5-6 days a week and they're still overweight. Aren't they burning as many calories as you, or maybe more? They probably don't even eat much as you. So if a calorie in is a calorie out, why are people eating the same amount of calories but are different sizes? Why are they doing the same exercise but are different sizes? It comes down to toxicity and deficiency. So when I tell you that when you eat something that's not actually a food, that's more of a chemical laden product, and your body is working hard to protect you, it's going to utilize your internal nutrients that you have stored up to deflect whatever this is coming in. And so eventually, if all you're putting in is chemicals and bad foods that are not going to enhance your nutrients, your macros, your micros, all the things, you're going to run out of your savings account. And eventually you can't protect yourself anymore. And we call that disease. Call it whatever you want. Give it whatever code on the insurance policy that makes the doctor happy, right? But disease only comes from two things: deficiency and toxicity. There's no other way to get dis-ease of the body. And then you go to the doctor and they give you something to suppress your symptoms so that you don't know that you're sick. You're still sick underneath, you just don't feel it anymore. So our system is manipulative. They want you to focus on calories so that you'll eat anything. I mean, I think the snack wells of our generation, right? Delicious as they were, but they were terrible chemical little cakes, but they had 100 calories. So people could eat them, but they were loaded with additives, preservatives, things that were like artificial sweeteners that we now know are carcinogens. So if something is a carcinogen and it has 100 calories, if I said, here, this will cause cancer in 10 years, but it has 100 calories, or you can eat this apple that has 100 calories, which one do you want? Right? So this organic, beautiful, non-GMO apple. So it's not that I'm saying like a calorie in and a calorie out, your body requires more calories to burn strawberries. That's not true. Strawberries are what are called low glycemic. So they don't increase your glucose into the blood. When glucose goes into the blood, your body produces insulin to take it out of the blood and put it into the cells. Insulin's catabolic. That means he builds. he's going to make you bigger if he keeps coming out, keep coming out. That's why people that have diabetes type 2 are normally overweight, because they have unstable insulin. So your body, when you're eating strawberries that's low glycemic, it doesn't produce that massive fluctuation of glucose into the blood, and you don't get this huge spike of insulin. But a snack wells will, even though it's low calories. So we have to remember that calories don't determine our health. They also don't determine whether or not you are going to be thin or even healthy. They're a unit of heat that we can actually measure in our body to fuel metabolic processes. Yes, we need calories to do that, but they do not determine weight, and they don't determine health. And I think that's going to be the hardest concept to break for people, because you'll hear parents say, well, he's got to eat something. He didn't eat any breakfast. Well, maybe little Jimmy needs to intermittent fast for a while to get his glucose under control. I don't know. Or you can feed him real food. So there's a massive difference between food and junk. No such thing as junk food. It's a made-up term to make you think that it's okay to eat chemical-laden products that are just going to poison your cells.
I love the way you broke that down. That is, first of all, you are so right. That concept of calories, I mean, I can still feel like I need to weed this out of my thought process. But I personally can see a difference in myself, and I've only been working on it for a couple of months. And that is so encouraging to me and I truly didn't have a lot of health issues. So it's not, I didn't have skin problems and not anything significant. So that, to me, just the overall health and well-being that I've seen in myself is pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about the amount of processed foods and how our culture has shifted so much. How did we get here? What has shifted in our food system and culture that has made junk, not even food, so dominant in our lives?
Yeah, well, since the 80s, we've had food subsidies. We shifted from things that are more, if you think about how you eat, you probably only eat 15 different foods. I mean, that's pretty remarkable, of like the 30,000 different varieties of nutrition that are out there. 15 different foods. If I would have you write down your intake of nutrition for a week, you'd probably have about 15 to maybe 30 foods that you eat. And that's everybody, and especially kids. So in the 80s, we went to more corn, soy, wheat, because it was cheap. And even before that, the Green Revolution happened. I don't know if you remember that, but the whole Green Revolution was going to solve world hunger. So they went and they started to genetically modify crops so that they could put nutrition in them. That's where it started. It started with golden rice. And golden rice was taken to third world countries and would cure the kids of blindness, because basically they were vitamin A deficient. So from the genetic modification, which started as a good thing, they thought, hey, we could genetically modify these really cheap products. And then if we flip the periodic table of nutrition and make carbohydrates the biggest thing, we could sell these really cheap products. And so they genetically modified corn, soy, wheat, and alfalfa. Those were the 4 products. And so everything shifted to carbohydrates. So if you remember the food guide pyramid, what's the biggest category? It's breads, pastas, all the things. And then even if you go gluten-free, what's that made from? Corn, soy. So they still get you. And so they genetically modified those to have a shorter growing period. And then from that genetic modification, they had to come up with different pesticides and whatnot that would keep the bugs from eating them. Because if you genetically modify something away, God spoke it into existence, it will get sicker quicker, because it's been modified to not, react in nature the way that God had intended. And now the bugs are going to attack it. We've had all of this propaganda since the 80s, the food pyramid, flipping it. And at the same time, marketing and advertising skyrocketed in the 80s. I mean, we were the TV generation. Saturday morning cartoons. What were the commercials? Cereal. By the age of 10, Kids see over 10,000 food ads per year, and 90% of those are for fast food, sugary drinks, and snacks. When you go into the grocery stores, how do they set up the store? Right? All the pretty stuff is down at the kid level for them to grab. You go up to the checkout. What's in the checkout aisle? It's not broccoli. They don't have apples lined up there. It's candy. So I think it was more advertising, cheaper foods because of the genetic modification, shorter growth from the Green Revolution and on. And I did a whole lecture on that. And that'll take us to our topic in glyphosate later. And then add on supersize me, fast food, convenience stores. And that's how we got here. Parents became too busy. Kids became too educated. They want what they want. They want what they saw. They saw it advertised on TV. I want that. They would go ask their parents for it. Parents throw their hands up. Everybody else in school's doing it. Their friends have it, right? And it just became a thing. And then Kellogg's did a really good job convincing us that cereal was a good idea. To wake up after an 8-hour fast from sleeping and spike your glucose with a high sugar, high carbohydrate cereal out of the gate with no fat or protein to balance it. And so these kids would go with high glucose and they would crash at about 10 o'clock. And from that time, we've seen decrease in academics. We've seen decrease in productivity. So, the Special K diet, not a good idea. That was another fad we went through.
Oh, I remember that fad. I actively participated in that fad. I can't say it was my favorite one, but it was one that I tried. So that leads us right into the next topic, actually, of school lunches. I'm excited to turn over to this because a lot of people may not necessarily think of the importance of food and school and lunch. Well, either meal, because there's oftentimes breakfast as well that is fed to children at schools, and not fully understanding how what they're eating does have an impact on how their academics, their performance, how they are behaving, and how they're thinking and feeling. So as I understand, you did some work within schools. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear, how would you rate school lunches? And just talk to me a little bit about your experience with those programs.
To be perfectly honest, when I did my research, and I did a program called the Healthy Kids Club, and I actually acquired a grant for it. It was the 21st Century Grant, and it was specifically targeted at kids that were obese. It wasn't just for the average kid that was an athlete, was involved in sports. These were kids that were obese or overweight, or their BMI was above a certain percentage. So when I acquired this grant, I went into the schools and we put together a curriculum. Some of that money went actually to building a facility for those kids where they could go work out. Some of the money went to my training and my staff so that I could bring additional people in. And then the majority of that money went to education. So what we really tried to do was educate these kids on what is food and what are some healthier choices, because a lot of these kids were lower income. And it was really about talking to the parents and educating them. These kids started out coming into school with drinking a Mountain Dew, going into their first class, maybe going into the school cafeteria and grabbing a donut, and then going into class. And I remember the first time I walked in, and from the research that I did, our school system lunches at that time, and this would probably have been 2008, were less nutritious and less, I don't want to say clean, but prison food was actually better quality than our school lunches at that time. So,
wow.
Long story short, I walked in the first day and they had an honors breakfast for all the super smart kids. They were in the cafeteria and they had donuts. They were like this big. And I stopped everybody and I said, I want everybody to put your fingers here and raise your hand when you can feel your heart rate. So everybody did that. I said, everybody take your heart rate. So they did. And I said, write it down or remember it. And I was like, okay, eat your donut. So they ate their donut. Nobody moved. They're all sitting. And I had them take their heart rate again about 5 minutes after everybody finished their donut. And their heart rates at rest were 20 to 30 beats higher after eating the sugary donut, just sitting there. So now these kids were expected to go back to class and think and focus. And this is what we're seeing in schools, is that the food that is available to them We know if you give a toddler sugar at 11:30 at night, you're not going to bed for a while. The same thing happens. It doesn't matter how old you are. Sugar has the same effect in the body. It looks like cocaine to the brain. So it's very much excitatory. And when you're giving kids that and expecting them to sit still and focus for 8 hours, and then the solution that schools have or physicians have or pediatricians is medication rather than education, that's a crime. That is not upholding your oath of do no harm. You should be talking to parents about nutrition. And I do understand there's parents listening, and I want to just say this. This is not a judgment, it's an opportunity. It doesn't matter what level of income you are. You can buy an apple versus a donut. And really, statistically, overall, eating healthy through the day versus junk food, the difference in financial for the day is $1.50 more to eat healthy, $1.50. So when we hear the propaganda that organic is expensive, okay, you don't want to buy organic? That's all right. Let's take a step towards real food first. Let's go from chemical laden cereals to eggs and bacon and toast in the morning. Let's do that. Take one step, right? Is it perfect for all my crunchies out there listening? No, crunchies are right now cringing inside. Oh my gosh, are they unpasteurized, or are they free range chickens, or are they free range pigs? I don't know. But for a parent that's just learning to go from cereal to real food, that's one step. And I think that's what we have to get to, Missy. We got to get to helping people climb the ladder rather than shoving them in one direction or another, because that's when it becomes overwhelming. So with school lunches, that was supposed to be a good program. It came out after World War II, because when they were recruiting soldiers, during the draft, they found that these guys were malnourished and they couldn't fight. And they were like, what's happening to all these young kids? Why are they so malnourished? Well, we had a lot of immigrants. We had a lot of poverty at that time. And, here we were with an army of malnourished, essentially kids, 17, 18-year-old kids that were joining the army. And so that was actually put in as school lunches. Churches did it, and then schools picked it up. In, the 1970s and 80s is when we really saw it go more towards processed, away from the real whole foods. So it's kind of how we got here. It was meant to be a good thing. I believe, I can't remember what president it was, Harry Truman, I think, that did the National School Lunch Act. And that was in like 1940s sometimes. And it was really just to safeguard health. And the shift to processed food, that happened, 70s, 80s. It was convenient. The USDA contracts, they brought big food industry in. Budget cuts happened at the school levels first. You saw surplus of farm commodities. They were turned into processed cheese, canned foods, refined beans. And, today you have over like 30 million kids participating in a school lunch program daily, So while the mission was health and feeding the hungry, and, the fun fact is that the USDA school meals, they reflect the dietary guidelines that we see on that terrible food guide pyramid: high in carbs, high in ultra processed, flavored milk, basically fortified junk, and they sell it as healthy. So that's what I think of school lunches.
That's
Yeah.
fair. And it's interesting because again, this has been such a journey for me, and I feel silly. I feel like I'm on the Bachelorette saying that, but truly it's been a real eye-opening experience to research school lunch, because I never really gave that much thought to school lunch and how much it mattered. But it does. And it's a fascinating, very surprising history of how we've gotten to where we are. And I definitely would say I did not think that lobbying had played such a huge part, and I did not understand about I had let me rephrase that. No, let me resay that. So I had heard that the food pyramid was a myth, or not really a myth, but it wasn't correct the way that it was out. But I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. It was just interesting. So you amazingly well highlight. I love actually that you did that with having them check their right? To immediately see the results from eating a donut. I think that's fascinating, and we think that's a reward to then sick kids, or not sick as in, send them into classrooms all hyped up and then expect them to sit
Mhm.
still. So clearly, food obviously has an impact on mental health, on other
Oh
health.
yeah.
Have you seen any schools that have successfully implemented healthier meals and leading to actual improved outcomes?
Yeah, there was actually a few schools that implemented one. There was an Appleton Central High School in Wisconsin. They removed vending machines, they removed junk food, and within 2 years, violence dropped, suspensions decreased, academic performance improved. There was a book called Eating for A's that actually documents schools that have had improved test scores, behavior, attendance just by changing the lunch. So there was also a study in the Lancet Psychiatry, and this showed that highly processed food intake is actually linked to ADHD symptoms. So this is all out there. It's not like it's not known. There's studies, the brain and the behavior link between what we put into our digestive system. Food is either the best form of medicine or your worst form of poison. And it's not that you have to be completely legalistic and never have some ice cream and, enjoy some certain things. But I think what we have gotten into is, again, a very busy society. The kids are sent to school maybe without breakfast. Sometimes school lunch is the only hot meal kids are getting, and what is in that lunch, right? So we have to start thinking, and our government has to start thinking about the funding that they're sending. Why was it cut? Why did we give kids who are the future of our country, that are put somewhere to learn and to be educated, why would we fuel their little bodies with junk? It seems kind of counterproductive. And we are falling in education, we are falling in innovation, and it's because of how we're fueling our body and what we're training these kids up to think is food. It's not. And I battle it in my house. My kids are not perfect. I don't know people that think like Tracey never feeds her kids anything bad. They get to a certain age, there's not much I can do except train them up in the way they should go so when they're older, they don't depart from it. They may have a small section of time where they my son wants the Gatorade, and he's going to be 16, and what am I going to do? He's going to be driving. I hope he chooses water. I hope the seed that I planted helps. That's all we can do is try. And if the influence of the world around our kids is constantly trying to break them down, I mean, what strength do we have as parents? We send them off like like sheep to the wolves, and we just hope that the seeds we plant help. So really important that we're talking to our kids about the choices in food, not to make it a good or bad thing, but more of like, this food is going to get you to the point of the goals that you have. Like when I talk to my older boy, I'm always talking to him about how to fuel his body, how to recover. And he'll listen. He takes his supplements, he takes his magnesium, he takes his SPMs, he takes his things because he's an athlete. And you know what? When he gets hurt, he does recover quickly because I have all the things that I can put in there. And I know you're going to be talking about vaccines. My kids are unvaccinated. I think that makes a big difference with metabolic function. So there's lots of things we can get into, but overall, talking to your kids about how food is fuel, and you as the parent reiterating and demonstrating. You can't eat donuts and talk to your kid about not drinking soda. Yes, those things are fine once in a while, but the majority of the time, 80% of your time, try to make it whole food, real, non-GMO, organic as much as possible. And then that 20% doesn't impede on our healthcare, as much as we're seeing today. I mean, it's really staggering to see how much our metabolic destruction has caused. It's like $173 million a year on diabetes. So
Wow.
yeah.
I didn't realize the statistics there. You just said that so well, of the importance of not thinking of food, not thinking of healthy food in such a scary way, because it is overwhelming or it can feel overwhelming for people who are just starting. Thank you, by the way, for highlighting that, hey, those small wins are important. So let's start with maybe not having the chemically laden cereals and take a step over. You
Mhm.
don't have to immediately make the jump all the way over to organic, grass-fed, pasture
You'll
raised,
get
because yeah, exactly. Actually, I'm definitely there. Like I went down on a spree pulling everything out of my fridge, and it just was, well, as much as I could, because my kids are in a similar situation actually.
absolutely.
But we I have tried to do that as well. I want to reiterate what you said about planting those seeds for your kids, because and don't feel um, not disappointed, don't feel disheartened as a parent if your kids do still want to have some snacks, and if you pack all the right snacks and lunches and then you find out that they're
You
trading it
trade it.
at
I
school,
know.
because they will, they
Do,
will.
yeah.
Um, but when they because that you actually highlighted, you said it exactly perfect. I think that there's a period of time that kids are going to go through, because they have outside
Mhm.
influences that are going to pull them off of what you're trying to do. They're establishing independence, all of that. But I do think at least most of the time they will come back to what you've trained them in. Another thing that you said that I really like is making it the way you said the 80-20 concept, because that makes healthy food very approachable. Let me rephrase that. That makes a healthy lifestyle very approachable, as opposed to something I've heard you say before, putting kids in a food prison.
Yeah.
So that is, I want to say, extremely appreciated, because I think a lot of parents would think, oh gosh, my kids are never going to even listen to me,
Yeah.
period.
Well, let's start with, how I train up moms and dads who come to see me. When I did the Healthy Kids Club, these were parents that would walk in, sit down, and their child was very overweight. They might have very thin siblings, which was my story. I grew up overweight and my siblings were all thin, although we ate the same thing. So you have one kid metabolically a little bit dysfunctional, right? And the other ones. And so I would say this has to be a household change. You can't just isolate little Jimmy over here with carrots and celery sticks and everybody else is eating pizza. It has to be a household change. So do the things that you can do, that you will do, and you can afford to do, right? Start with drinking more water, taking the devices away at night. These all impact health. These are all influences, whether you drink soda or drink water, whether you're watching a commercial about McDonald's or you don't have that iPad, right? And then start to trade out foods. And I tell the parents, everything your kids love, all the junk, the chips, the cereal, the everything, go down the organic aisle and buy the exact same thing, but only organic. So buy chips, buy cereal, buy cakes, buy brownies, but all organic. You know what happens? The price is so high, much higher for those things that the parents are like, well, I don't want to spend $6 on a brownie mix that's organic so he doesn't need that. And then I'll say, okay, when you go home and you health budget now and you're going to cut out some of these things, I want you to take that money and go buy fresh fruits and vegetables and train your kids up. You have to change their palate. We did this to them, Missy. We did it. We created the food prison for the kids. We as parents, because we were like, here, just eat this, right? And it could have been like, I don't know, a Snicker bar, because we didn't make time. We didn't plan. We're running from one thing to another because that's what society tells us to do. You got to have your kid in every sport, and you got to have the top job, and you got to have the house and the dog and the 2.5 kids in the white picket fence, because that's what society deems. And so we became too busy. So I always tell parents, like, you don't give your kid the opportunity to like anything else. Put the bowl of fruit on the table. Put the bananas not back on the bread box. Put the bananas out where they can get them. Put grapes out. Put carrot sticks out before dinner. Like, start putting things out in front of them. And kids, you know what they do? They eat it. They'll eat it. If there's cut up strawberries on my table, they'll eat it. And as a mom, you probably know this. I don't know if you have boys. I have boys, but anything I eat, they tend to want. So I always try to eat something healthy. And then they come over and they're like, what are you eating? And I'm like, do you want to play? So
Oh,
it's a really great diet plan. You never get to eat when you have boys. So, but it just, you have to present other foods And so when we put kids in food prisons, I'm not a restrictive practitioner. I don't tell parents, like, cut this out, don't do this. What I say is, let's take everything he loves and let's make it organic first and find some flavors and things that he likes. And then I want you to start presenting, and I want you to open up their palate. They're probably only eating 15 foods. If you would ask kids what are their favorite fruits, they're going to say bananas, apples, and grapes because that's all they've ever been exposed to. What about mangoes? What about kiwis? What about plantains? What about coconut? What about all these other things that are out there that because we only eat 15 foods, they only eat 15 foods. So food prisons all around, right? Where we're not providing them variety. Some people get real restrictive with their kids and will put them in a calorie restriction diet, or they can only have certain foods. And then that feels isolating. That feels like deprivation. That makes the kid not want to eat healthy because they associate healthy with deprivation. And you don't want to put that little Pavlov's dog's conditioned response in there. That's what happened to us, right? Fat free, Atkins, like all of these very restrictive plans that they're not sustainable. What is sustainable is opening that palate and saying, hey, you can eat any of the fruits here that you want, any of the vegetables, any of these meats, any of these, whole grains and things like that, are organic or sprouted. Like, hey, let's make sourdough. Let's talk about how to make sourdough. Let's do fun things. I let my kids cook with me all the time. It gets them interested. So I think the food prison is right now. I think when parents have kids that are very limited in what they're eating, that's the prison. The opportunity is to open it up for them and not be so restrictive and let them explore a little bit.
That's a really good point, actually. And I do 100% support what you're saying, that I think a lot of parents aren't aware even that they are influencing what their kids are eating by either talking negatively about food, by avoiding certain foods. Because, yes, there are other images. I have a hilarious story of all of my kids hated Brussels sprouts for years, for most of their life, until they were like teenagers, mid-teens, because Peppa Pig apparently on one episode said that Brussels sprouts were terrible. However, all of my kids love Brussels sprouts now, but they had to get over this, silly message that they received from a cartoon. But
Propaganda.
yeah, it really is, actually, it's funny because as a parent or as an adult, I laugh at it, but really, truly, I didn't even realize that happened, but I always thought that was fascinating. So when this is very empowering, and I really appreciate that you're helping to frame it for parents so that they can feel that how approachable this is and make it something that they can actually do.
Mhm.
What about when it comes to school? So you talked about the more affordability of organic or healthier eating, and you debunked the myth that healthy food is more expensive. But what's your advice for schools who may want to improve their lunches but feel limited by budgets or federal requirements?
Yeah. I mean, add a salad bar. That's it. It's an
Mm,
easy way, to get greens, vegetables. And I know it's probably not going to be organic and non GMO, but it's something, right? Also, they're given a certain amount of money. They're subsidized. I think the average school lunch subsidy is like $3.80 some cents a day, but it's processed food companies that can hit that price point. And so they need to take some of the money that they get and put it into the food program more. They can't tell me they don't have some stash COVID money. We all know they do. So utilize that to, create gardens in your school, partner with local farmers. Our school a few years back, and this is probably a decade or so ago, they had a greenhouse out back. Now that program's gone, but it was there at one time, and they taught kids how to grow food and how to take care of plants and how to sprout seeds. I mean, that's real stuff. That's things that they'll take on, and even if it's not organic, non-GMO now, later on as an adult, they can make that decision through education, but they already know how to grow it. For schools, though, they need to take some of that money and put it more into a better nutrition program. And there are schools that do it. In the schools that do it, we have already talked about, right? See improvements. There's schools that took out vending machines. I don't think there's any vending machines in our schools, but in your schools, if there's vending machines, take them out. Put bottled water in. Don't have chips and pretzels. If you ever see like the alternate lunch, it's always like a chicken patty, hot dog, pizza, or peanut butter and jelly. And then there's donuts and cakes. Why don't we have apples, bananas, grapes, kiwis, like fruit? Let's have some fruit. Put some money into some storage facilities within there that can keep these things, and let those be options for kids. Kids will choose it if you put it out in front. So, and I would take out flavored milks. If you want to have milk, all right, have, white and chocolate, go back to old school. Now we give rewards as donuts to academic achievement so that we can dumb down your neurological communication and maybe make you a little bit less smart. So we need to bring back more real whole foods, and the programs that have done it have seen improvement.
You've touched on it several times now, and this is something I'm seeing as a consistent concept throughout all of these topics that I'm covering, and that is how we were fed the lie of the importance of materialism, and that you had to have the bigger house and have the better, higher paying job and do all the things and have your kids in all the sports instead of just one sport and travel to everything. And it's really unfortunate because that there's so many ripple effects on the family to it, even down to this of losing skills on or understanding how to do the canning and fermentation, like you were talking about before we started. I find it fascinating how these lies have permeated so much of our lives without even realizing it.
I would say to RFK that, he's up there. I would say if we changed our commercialization for 1 year, that within 3 years, the whole narrative would shift. If we commercialized fresh fruits, vegetables, canning with your grandma, and put those commercials on TV over and over again, 10,000 times a year for kids to see, that's what they would do. That's called propaganda.
Yep.
Why don't they do that? Why do we have beer commercials? Why do we have all of these crazy things? Why do we have pharma commercials? Do you know that pharmaceutical companies are the only companies that can advertise a product that you can't buy? So why are they advertising it? Because when you go to your doctor and you ask them for that medication, you lose your informed consent. They don't have to tell you about it now. They don't have to tell you all the side effects. I mean, I can't tell you how many times my kid has bought something off a TikTok shop, right? He came down with ashwagandha the other day. I mean, I'm a health professional. I have my own store. I have my own supplements. And he comes down with ashwagandha off the TikTok shop. And I said, what did you buy that for? He's like, I want to increase testosterone. And I was like, I have ashwagandha. What brand is that? I don't even know what brand that is. But that's the propaganda. So what if we would change the narrative? What if we would ban pharma commercials and ban beer commercials and put on healthy farming and commercials for your local farmer and give space to this? What would happen in 5 years? You'd have a completely new world.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I was talking with my husband about this a couple months ago, and we had this idea. It would be interesting to see the government subsidize and put funding into healthy, really healthy food, right? Organic foods. I bet we could see an increase, and all of a sudden then it'd be more affordable too, right? Supposedly.
And I have to tell you, when RFK came back and he said, with food stamps and things like that, that they were going to limit the amount of sugary products and things. I think that's great, because honestly, the people that are utilizing those food stamps, some of them are sick. Some of them just don't know. And people are in an outrage about it, that, we should be able to buy anything we want. Well, the cost of healthy food, I do believe that the government should subsidize organic farmers so that we can bring the cost down, because they're going to lose more crops, right? Because they're not using the pesticides, they're not using the herbicides. So they will lose more crops. And so they do sell at a higher price, which can increase it. But the impact of what processed food does on long-term health as we said before, $173 billion spent on obesity related healthcare a year compared to paying $1.50 more a day. We need to really take this funding and start at the root, start at the farmers, start at getting pricing down. Over here, you can cut food stamps for certain products, but you didn't fix the reason that people are buying those things with their $400 a month. It's not about giving them more money. It's about giving them more value, not only in their dollar, but in the food itself. So fix this. Go lobby against big ag. Go lobby against those pharmaceutical companies that benefit from your disease. They don't benefit from your health. You don't need a pharmaceutical if you're eating healthy. If you eat organic, non-GMO, and you exercise and you sleep and you think right, move right, poop right, pray right, do all those things right, you don't need pharmaceuticals. So why are we not going back here and going against the agricultural companies and saying, we're not giving you any more money. We're going to give it to Farmer Joe over here who has an A2A, cows and, is raising all his own crops and foods. And we're going to give him that money so that he can get more land, so he can produce more of the product, so that we can get the pricing down, so that this person over here who needs the assistant, who needs that assistance every month, can buy quality food for the same value. That's what we need to fix. This over here, it's not their fault. It's not their fault that all of this is in place over here. Like, we got to get to the root. So
I think that is exactly right. And I would love to see that actually happen. We have had a lot of very positive conversation or points through this conversation of the things that we can do to improve. So let me wrap it up and ask if there's any final thoughts that you have that we maybe didn't get a chance to cover. And then where can people find you? Because you are absolutely incredible. And I know that you actually have a practice, so people can reach out to you, not just for speaking. So how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, health is overwhelming. So take it slow, do what you can, right? I talk to people again, what you can do, what you will do, and what you can afford to do. It doesn't have to be a battle. You have a lifetime to raise these kids, and there's nothing that's bigger than God. If you give them things that have glyphosate now and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do to them? The body's amazing. It regenerates. I see it happen every day. So take little steps, little wins, add more water, better bedtimes, display the fruit, and then start to count chemicals versus calories. Start to really look at your labels. What's in your cereal? Why do they put BHT in cereal? That's an explosive. We don't need our children blowing up. You just don't need it. They could use vitamin E as a preservative versus that. So why don't they? There are great cereals out there that taste just like the real thing. So start to take those little steps, those little wins. And then, as you grow in your knowledge, I would encourage you to keep the open conversation of propaganding healthy food as fuel. It can become very overwhelming for parents, and all of a sudden they're restricting, and your kids can learn to hate healthy eating because they can't do anything. That 80-20 rule is really going to keep you healthy. Right? 80% when your kids are at home, you're doing the home cooked meals, the organic, the non-GMO, learn how to make them tasty. I will tell you, I'm a foodie, and everything I cook, I taste good, right? Well, at least I think so. I don't know about my family, but you can make healthy food taste good. It doesn't have to be such a negative mindset around it. And then as you grow in this knowledge and you want to start growing your own, teach your kids, let them cook with you, let them plant with you, let them learn with you. You are just ensuring their future. It's the best thing that you can do. Both my kids can cook. So
I think that's needed. We need to pass on that knowledge, because otherwise you just get stuck buying Hunger Man dinner. I probably shouldn't say that, buying frozen dinners and whatever. And that is it's just not as healthy as people think. So where can people find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, my website's the easiest way. It's just my name, Tracey Stroup, nd.com. So you can visit me there. It has my academy. It has all the classes. I have a full class on glyphosate if parents want to know. I also have a full class on foundations of health. It just teaches you how to read labels, what food ingredients are, what is food, what is non-food, how to make it a little bit healthier. So all of those are there. And for practitioners too, if you want to learn how to interpret tests, that's all on there. But just TraceyStroupND.com, and you can find me there. If you need a health consult, we're available.
Awesome. And I just want to plug real quick, folks, that she has a podcast. She's got books as well, all sorts of interesting things that will help you actually be empowered with knowledge in order to be healthy. So thank you so much, Tracey. I have so enjoyed having you here in this conversation. And I just thank you. I can't wait for next time.
Thanks for all you do.
I absolutely love talking with Dr. Tracey. I feel like I could talk to her all day long. Like I said earlier, this has truly been an eye-opening discovery for me, a month of a journey of just unlearning so many things that I've believed with every fiber of my being from pretty much forever. So if you're like I was and you're still counting calories, well, maybe it's time to count chemicals instead. Because as she reminded us, a donut and an apple may share a number of calories, but only one of those won't confuse your body into a metabolic meltdown. Finding out the truth about glyphosate sneaking into our food, even organic food, and even vaccines. Then we moved on to prison food being better than school lunches, at least at one point. That was a shocker. This conversation was an absolute wake-up call for me, but wrapped in a nice warm hug. So go ahead, ditch the snack cakes, plant a tomato, and by golly, maybe even ferment something with your grandma. Your health, your kids, and your future self will thank you. And remember, if it falls from a tree, runs on the ground, flies in the sky, or swims in the sea, it's probably food. Everything else? Well, let's just say your body deserves better. I hope you enjoyed the first campus briefing as we focus on MAHA in schools. This week, we talked about food, nutrition, and school lunch. Next week, we dive into vaccines and especially informed consent. Coming up later in the fall, we're reviewing EdTech, data collection, and AI. And then we'll move on to social media and video gaming and how that's impacting our kids' health, mental health especially. You are not going to want to miss these topics. Don't forget about this incredible new event that we have live on Capitol Hill called Rhetoric for the Republic. It's a debate style event where we bring in people from opposing perspectives or at least slightly different views to hash out their differences over some of the hottest topics that are out there right now. At M4L Academy, our goal is always to educate you on the issues, equip you with the tools and resources you need so that you can become engaged citizens, not enraged activists. Because as was famously said by James Madison, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty. And that is the mission of M4L Academy. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great night.